So guys, let's start refactoring here the first name, okay? In that order, let's just create here a new class. Let's call it my first name. So having here the first name, the first thing that we need to do is to give a field. Let's call it by value. So now that we have the first name and the field value, which will receive the value of the first name, okay, let's make it immutable by adding here, for example, a private constructor. So having it like this, we won't allow any other, let's suppose, object to create or to instantiate this first name, but we need to provide a mean to instantiate or to create a first name. So let's use, for example, as a static method. So let's receive here the attribute. So when we are creating a first name, we need to validate. We don't want to leave this validation, for example, to our controller, because some people use the Javax or Jakarta validation. So we are not using that because this first name can be instantiated or can be created in different components in different moments in our application. So the first thing we need to validate if the value of this first name is not null. I like to use this Java 1. So we just give a message. The next thing that I want to validate is maybe if the value is not empty. I'm using the assert is true from Spring, okay? If you're using Spring framework, so you should be familiar with this utility method, utility class, which is very nice to add some validations. So I just gave a message. So we are validating that the value, okay, is not blank. So having it like that, so now I can just return the first name with the value provided, which is a valid value. So now that we have here our first name with some validations, some behaviors, we need to provide a getter, okay, in order to get the first name when, or in order to get the value of the first name when it's needed. I'm using the Lombok getter. And the next thing that we need to do is to provide a mean to be persistable. So for example, here in the customer, we will use the first name, okay? So it's complaining because it's just a basic. In that order, we need to provide a mean to be persistable. So in that order, I'm just using here the embeddable. I'm just using here the Jakarta annotation, which will make its first name persistable. So it's complaining because it needs a default or no arguments constructor. So in that order, I'm just providing here using the Lombok 1. The access level in this case will be, let's say, protect. So as we can see, it's not complaining anymore. So we are going to do the same for the last name. So having here the last name, now we need to use it here in our customer. So we are going to do the same for local date because we want to validate that the user is not providing any invalid birth date. Okay, so in that order, let's just create here another class. Let's call it by birth date. We are going to do the same. So we are going to provide a value. The value is a type of local date. We are going to provide also a private constructor. Now that we have our constructor, which is private, we need to provide a method which will allow other components which will allow us to create the birth date or to instantiate the birth date. So we are going to follow the same. I like to make this argument as final, using the Java in order to validate if the value passed is not null. Having it like this, now we need to, for example, validate if the date is from past, because no one can be born in the future. So in that order, maybe we can just use here, for example, is after, and the after should be the now. Okay, let's just leave it like that. So it's complaining because it needs also a message. Most of the time we leave these validations in our controller using the Jakarta validation or Javax validation. But now, using the value object, we need to bring all these validations and all the behavior into our domain object. So we are doing it right using the good approach, which is the real object-oriented programming principle. So having it like that, the next thing that we need is to add here a getter, because we need a mean to get the birth date, the value of the birth date, and also we need to add the Jakarta annotation in order to make this field persistable. And next thing that we need is to provide a no-art constructor, but for our case we are going to use the access level protect. We are using it because the hibernate needs it. Okay, so now that we have it, let's just use it here. So for email address, we can follow, for example, here, just in order to make it more interesting, we are going to use here the test-driven development. Okay, so let's just create here, for example, email address. Okay, let's create the class. Okay, now the first thing we need to create a test. Now that we have here our test, I think that we should let's just annotate it by test. Let's create our test here. Let's just call it by void. It will be, the name will be off, okay, because we are going to create an email with some values. So let's just for now give it like, for example, so let's just provide here our given. Okay, so now let's use the email address off. Okay, so it should, for example, receive here this email address. It's complaining because there is no this method. Okay, now we are going to create the method. Let's just refactor it like this. So for this email address, okay, let's just put it like this. Yeah, the next thing that we need to do is, for example, now let's finish the implementation. Here, what we are going to have here will be almost the same. Let me just put it quickly. Now we create, as always, a private constructor. So having like this, for now, let's just return here a new email address using the value. Okay. Now let's add some assertions here in our test. So let's use the first one, assertions. So now let's assert the equality. So the first thing is the one that we expect here. Email address should be equal. So let's just call it by actual. So just like this. And yeah, so guys, if you remember, the way that we compare the value objects is using the equals, okay, of the value. So in that case, let's just, for example, get here the value. So it's complaining. Now let's add here the get value. So we are going to use the long block. So now that we have it here, so we are going to expect that this is a valid. Okay, so as we can see, this is the way that we validate or that we compare, okay, two different value objects. We compare them by the values, okay? That's why we call it by value object. And yeah, if I put, for example, just like this, let's suppose an invalid email address, it will pass also, okay? But now let's just make it more fun, adding here some more logic. For example, we need to validate that the email address contains the @ okay? And in that order, let me just, for example, or not, or for example, if I passed here, yeah, let me just add here. So this is the regex that we will use to validate the email address. So as always, okay, for example, I'm just going to test here once again. Let me just, for example, void. So if we pass here, for example, if we create an email address with null, okay, it will allow us to create an email address with null value, okay? So for example, email address dot auth, let's put it null. So this is not good, okay, because we need also to validate it. But for now, let's do something like validating this use case. So now we are going to, for example, test if we create an email address with null value, okay, we are going to expect it to throw us an exception, for example, null pointer exception. So in that order, let's just use the assertion. So we are going to expect null pointer exception, and we are going to expect it when we create email address with null, okay, with null value. So now let's just, for example, here. So let's just expect, for example, the email address cannot be null. So let's just use it, let's just annotate it as a test. Okay, now we run the test. Okay, it fails. Okay, the test fails because it didn't throw any exception. So we are expecting it to throw a custom exception that the email address cannot be null, but we are not having this result. So in that order, let's go here, and now let's add here the validation. This is the pure Java, object requires not null, and then we are going to use that, the email, the message, okay? So now let's run our test once again. So it should not be here. So let's just check once again. Okay, maybe it's the message. Let's put here, yes, the correct message. So now the test passed. Okay, so this is a very nice way to implement the test-driven development. As you can see that we were first testing, it fails, then we went there, implement the logic to validation, okay, to validate the value that cannot be null. And now the test is passing. So yeah, that's good. Now let's just implement here the last logic in order to finish this chapter of value object. Let's just create here, let's just, for now, for example, assert once again, okay, using the Spring One. We are going to assert that the value, okay, is not blank. So if it is blank, we are going to say that the email address cannot be blank or empty. So this is another assertion. And the last thing that we need to do is to actually, okay, validate the email. Okay, we will accept only valid emails. Okay, because if we take a look here, we are passing, for example, this one, okay? So if we send, for example, an email address just like this, sum1, okay, it will accept, okay? So we are not validating the email address. A value object, or when we create domain objects, okay, domain model, the rich domain model, okay, we need to have validations too. So this is what we are going to do here. In order to validate it, it can be very easy. So we can use, for example, the pattern. Okay, we can use the Spring One, but let's just use the Java one. So we are going to compile these regex. Okay, this one here that we are going to use here, and yeah, we are going to see if the value, okay, matches. So let's just make it like that. Nope, it should be like, for example, we need to call the method matches. Okay, so let's do this like this. It will return a boolean. Okay, so and then we, for example, we will assert also. We will use here the assertion. Okay, and we are going to tell that, okay, it matches. Okay, it should be true. Well, the regex, the value should match. Okay, the regex. So yeah, if not, okay, if it doesn't match, okay, it's a boolean. If it doesn't match, we are going to say, like, for example, invalid email address. Okay, now if we run our test, now it fails because it's an invalid email address. Now if we use, for example, at gmail.com, now it passes. Okay, so we can keep playing with TDD and domain-driven design, value objects, and so on. But for now, let's just finish like this. Let's just go here in our customer. So it's complaining because it's a basic type and cannot be persisted. In order to persist it, we are, so it's complaining. And now that we have here the annotation, okay, the embeddable, the next thing that we need to do is once again to add a noirs constructor because the Hibernate needs that. So we are going to make it protect, okay. So yeah, that's it. Let's check. Now we have our customer using, we have our customer entity, okay, with value objects, okay. As we can see here, most of them are value objects. Yes, so this is what we expect here. Maybe just to make it better, it should be Gmail, not this typo. So guys, yeah, you can, for example, write the negative case here, okay, the bad case here, and so on. Now let's go back to our customer and yeah, let's create a customer. Let's add a method, okay, that will allow us to create a customer. The first thing that we need to understand here in our value objects is that it's immutable, okay. We are not providing here any other method, okay, that will allow us to change, for example, a first name, okay. Once you have the first name, if you want to have, or if you want to change the first name, it's impossible, okay. Once you try to create another first name, so it will be a new first name, okay. We are not providing here the setters, okay. So be careful when you use the setter method on your classes, okay, on your domain model. So that's why we are using here, the value object, and we don't have here the setter method. So let's keep going. So guys, before moving further, we know that we need to use always a meaningful name for our methods, right? So I don't think that it's good, even if it's just an example. We should always keep the best practices, okay. That's why I'm just going to refactor here these methods, okay. And yeah, I will actually use the given, when, then approach to write our test. You can see, you can learn about this, or you can take a look on Martin Fowler blog post, okay, or even you can, for example, read some other test-driven development or behavior-driven development documentations or blog posts. But as you can see, I'm really fan of this guy. So in that order, I'm just going to use this approach, given, when, then, in this video. But I will skip this part because this video is getting so long. So hope you see it in the next video. So as we can see, now we have here a meaningful name for our tests, and you can still adding more tests for our email address test, okay? And you can use always TDD, test-driven development. And yeah, let's go. Let's move to our customer.